A white professor discovered that the new janitor in the lab was peeking at his medical handbook. The professor handed him a pair of tweezers and asked him to pick up a test tube. The janitor completed it with ease. The professor then asked him to use his left hand, and he remained steady, even picking up 2 stoppers to seal the bottles simultaneously. The professor was stunned because it took him 10 years to master such two-handed coordination. The professor pointed at the instruments and asked his name. The professor was overjoyed and made an exception, promoting him to laboratory assistant. But when he told his wife, she did not share his joy. The job paid only $12 a month, far less than his income as a carpenter. Vivien did not care. He had dreamed of medicine since childhood. After graduating from high school, he worked 7 years as a carpenter to save money, all to one day enter medical school. He went to the bank to withdraw money, only to find it had collapsed. The bank told him to go home. 7 years of savings vanished and he lost motivation. Later, on a friend's recommendation, he worked as a janitor at the medical school. The pay was low, but it brought him closer to his dream. He worked diligently, eventually impressing the professor and becoming a laboratory assistant. He studied relentlessly, carrying books to and from work. The professor gave him the opportunity to operate independently on a puppy suffering traumatic shock from an injury. Under the professor's guidance, Vivien located the abdominal artery. The professor said the standard procedure required tightening the blood vessel, but they would do the opposite. The blood pressure continued to drop, and just when they nearly gave up, the number suddenly rose and the puppy survived. Vivien experienced the joy of saving a life for the first time. The professor wanted to see his work records and Vivien was puzzled. The professor became furious, saying he had to do everything himself, asking if Vivien's mind was full of wood shavings. Vivien removed his white coat and was about to leave. The professor noticed a notebook on the desk, detailing every surgical step as meticulously as professional equipment. The professor suddenly realized the truth, immediately apologized and promised it would not happen again. Vivien chose to forgive. For the next 12 years, the two worked together in traumatic shock research, achieving world-renowned results and saving countless soldiers during World War II. The professor gained great fame and was invited to Johns Hopkins Medical School. At the celebration dinner, the professor enjoyed the honor alone, making Vivien serve drinks. Vivien remained devoted, hoping that one day his portrait would hang in Hopkins. On his first day at Hopkins, a security guard stopped Vivien, saying all workers must enter through the back door. The professor announced he was the chief surgery professor, but it made no difference. This was a century-old tradition. Vivien had no choice but to enter through the back door. Wearing the white coat, he faced doubt from black colleagues and surprise from white colleagues. A white doctor mistook him for a janitor and ordered him to buy bread and coffee. Dr. Helen Tausig was willing to communicate with Vivien. She researched blue baby syndrome, a congenital heart defect causing insufficient blood flow to the lungs with near-certain death. She invited the professor to collaborate. The professor agreed because he had once nearly died from tuberculosis and had sworn to accomplish something great after recovery. The infant's vessels were too small, requiring smaller forceps and ventilators. The professor asked Vivien to use his carpentry skills to make them. But Vivien also worked maintenance after hours to support his family. His wife decided to work, facing the problem of caring for their daughter. 3 months passed with no progress and the number of puppies decreased. Colleagues advised the professor to give up, but he said, "You see risk, I see opportunity." Vivien said that compressing the vessels caused the puppies to suffocate. The professor had an idea, asking him to try other methods. Vivien looked at a lung model and was inspired, creating a practical ventilator. The professor was ecstatic. Vivien then created surgical auxiliary equipment, repeating experiments until he could perform surgery on puppies with his eyes closed. White colleagues were amazed. The cafeteria lady gave him an extra hamburger. A black janitor was jealous, mocking him as a level 3 maintenance worker earning $10 less than himself. Vivien went to human resources and found he was indeed a level 3 technician, earning only $64 a month, living this way for 13 years. The professor joked that killing puppies would deduct from his pay, and Vivien collapsed mentally, removing his work clothes and leaving. The professor found him in the black restroom, learned his pay and advised him not to care about salary, for the work's value far exceeded pay. Their perspectives differed and Vivien still left. In the lab, the oxygen data reached ideal levels, successfully replicating blue baby syndrome in puppies. The professor insisted Vivien was indispensable and requested the dean to increase his pay and promotion. The dean was reluctant to break tradition for a black man, but the professor pressed with experimental results and the dean relented. The professor visited Vivien, informing him of a $25 pay raise and promotion to surgical technician, enabling him to afford rent and focus on research. Vivien returned to the lab, forgiving past grievances. After successfully replicating blue baby syndrome, they began testing treatment. connecting a shunt from the subclavian artery to the pulmonary artery. Vivien used his self-invented fine suturing method to sew vessels, and the professor praised it as divine work. They contacted the child's family, who consulted a priest, but the priest tried to stop them, saying heart surgery violated God's will. The professor argued that miracles were created by humans and asked the priest not to hinder saving the child. Soon, a puppy died from a ruptured vessel. The professor realized, sutures do not grow with vessels, and vessel expansion would stress and rupture the thread. They needed a new suturing technique. The infant's condition worsened, and the new suturing method was urgent. That afternoon, witnessed by many medical doctors, Vivien personally performed the new suturing technique, with the professor as assistant. The surgery succeeded. But the next day, when gathering surgical assistants, only Dr. Rommel volunteered. The dean urged the professor to postpone the surgery. He refused, for delay meant death for the infant. The professor was sleepless, doubting his sanity. On surgery day, the infant's parents prayed. The venue was filled with dignitaries, and Vivien was initially excluded. The professor hesitated to begin, and Rommel brought Vivien in. Rommel said hospital rules allowed only attending physicians in the operating room. The professor broadcasted, calling Vivien to come immediately. Vivien arrived, changed into surgical attire, and disinfected. Hopkins' operating room welcomed its first black surgical assistant in history. With Vivien present, the professor was fully focused. Many steps were actually guided by Vivien. During the critical shunt step, an assistant knocked the surgical lamp. The professor made a mistake but quickly used Vivien's custom hemostat to control bleeding. The infant's blood pressure dropped to 60 millimeters of mercury, indicating shunt success. The infant's complexion gradually improved, marking the first successful human cardiac surgery. Everyone congratulated the professor, but some gossipers said he was lucky to have that black man beside him. The professor found Vivien and sincerely praised his contributions. Everything was acknowledged with a shared smile. Their achievements spread worldwide, attracting patients and medical doctors. The professor became a top expert. But in media photos and headlines, Vivien was excluded, not even mentioned. He attended the celebration banquet, disguising himself as a waiter to enter the front door. When the professor introduced team members, he completely ignored Vivien. Vivien felt disheartened and decided to leave. The next day, he submitted his resignation. The professor asked if it was just to argue with those in power, who would never let him join their club. Vivien said, "I am not talking about them, nor Hopkins, I am talking about you. They created history, but history would never bear his name." He left resolutely. He switched to pharmaceutical sales, building his business rapidly through reputation and connections. After a few years, he had his own car and improved material life. But his wife noticed his inner emptiness and encouraged him to return to the lab. Vivien mustered courage and returned to the professor's office. He said he had made a mistake and wanted to return to his original position. The professor asked what would be different. Vivien said it was not about him, it was about the work. This reunion was no longer for fame or fortune, but purely for passion. For the next 15 years, Vivien stayed in the lab, training many PhD students and bringing hope to countless patients.